Hello again, welcome back to Wheels and Things. Today we are going to flush the radiator and put in some new coolant. This is kind of continued from my previous timing belt water pump replacement. So I haven't started the car since that service, but first we need to, since we have all the coolant out, I figured I'd flush the radiator with some water since it probably hasn't been done, and then we'll fill it back up with coolant, and I'm going to show you that process. I'm using All Data DIY as my reference for this, as well as the instructions that came with this fancy tool, the Airlift. It wasn't an inexpensive tool, but looking at the tech data, it strongly suggests using one of these guys, and so I figured I'd get one so that I could get all the air out of the systems of modern cars, of the cooling system specifically. So we're going to go ahead and give this guy a try and see if we can get the coolant system all purged and filled with distilled water first, and then later coolant. All right, so I've already got this set in the coolant reservoir, tightened down. I've got the Venturi on here, which when we hook it up to the shop air, is going to draw air out of the system and create a vacuum, hopefully, assuming that there's no leaks in the coolant system. So this will be kind of the first test of the coolant system. So it'll probably be loud, but here it goes. Well, that took a very short amount of time, a lot faster than expecting to pull a vacuum. So we've got the vacuum right now, and it looks to be holding, which is a good sign, means we don't have any leaks in the coolant system. Especially a good sign since I pulled the water pump off and reinstalled it using some silicone sealant. So it's not budging at all. It makes me feel like I did a good job and we're likely to not have leaks in the system. So a good way to check early on. All right, here I've got my instructions for my Airlift coolant tool, coolant refilling tool. So we got the shop air on. We got the system to 25. Doesn't tell me what units those are, but it's 25 on the gauge, which is where we expect to be, and it's holding. Yep, it's been more than 20 seconds and it's still holding, so that's a good sign. So now what we're going to do is going to disconnect the Venturi, which is this piece right here. So I've got the valve closed, so I need to be careful not to break the seal on the main radiator. So we'll leave that there in case we need it again. Now I've got this hose, which we'll use to draw in the water and then later coolant into the system, so we'll hook that up. Again, very careful not to break the vacuum. All right, looks like we got that hooked up. All right, connect the refill hose, place the screen into the coolant supply of your choice. Open ball valve, and the coolant will start to fill the vehicle cooling system. Cooling system is full when the vacuum gauge reaches 0. On some vehicles, a second vacuum may be necessary. So an important thing is to make sure you place your whatever you're sucking into the radiator at the same height. Got some distilled water here that we're going to use to flush the system. So we'll use that as our filling source. Put that up here. Carefully, not spilling too much of it here. Wow, that's going quite quickly. So I want to cut it off before I run out of water, because otherwise it'll just suck air. Wow, this is a very efficient way to do it. Okay. So we only got down to about 15, so may take more water than I anticipated. All right, we're getting there actually. I think this will fill it up. So yeah, we've gotten to the max line on the coolant bottle. Not sure if that's the hot or cold line, but I think we're basically done here. It's at 0. So that actually worked really well. That was extremely efficient. All right, just a quick double check to make sure I've done everything. I've got everything hooked back up here. Got all my pumps back on, batteries hooked back up. Need to refill the washer fluid. Got a good amount of water in the cooling system. Okay, so the data says we're going to operate the engine with the coolant cap in place. We're going to run it up, get it up to a low operating temperature at first, and then we'll wait till it cools down. And when it cools down, it'll suck more coolant, in this case water, into the radiator, and then we can add more water if necessary, but I'll probably just flush it, do it one more time, and then finally flush it and add the final coolant. All right, radiator cap is on. Heater is in the on position, so we're gonna start it up. All right, the first run of the engine was successful. Everything went well, revved it up a couple times after it was warm, of course. Got it up to operating temperature. Now we just gotta wait for it to cool down, drain that water, and do it again. Okay, we're still draining the coolant. So when you drain the coolant, so this is after the first distilled water fill, basically you leave the cap on, you open the drain cock on the radiator, you let it drain until it basically stops, and that'll drain this tank. If you leave the cap off, it may not drain this tank properly. But then once it kind of stops, you take the cap off, and then it begins to drain the radiator. So I've jacked up the side of the car enough so that I can fit a 5-gallon bucket under here. Works really well. So yeah, I used a clean bucket for this one, so we'll see if there's any sediment and how orange it is, because the coolant is orange. And that'll let us know what we need to do. So lubricating the drain cock really helped. I'm not worried about it breaking anymore. So I mentioned that in the last video that it seemed like it was really sticky and it might break, but I lubricated it with some WD-40. Works great now. All right, we're in the middle of draining after our first fill. So basically, since it's getting late, I've decided that if this comes out clean, meaning there's not a lot of sediment or other things in there, and if there's not a ton of coolant still left in the system of the original coolant, I'll probably just do this one flush, and then the next time we suck the vacuum, we'll just put coolant in. It'll save me some time and yeah, get this done sooner so that I can put it back together and hopefully drive it tomorrow. So just waiting for the radiator to drain now. Okay, so not so good news. There was still a lot of old coolant that came out. Didn't see any like sediment or anything, but a lot of old coolant. So I'm gonna do what I think is the right thing and flush this with water again. So I'll go ahead and show you how to do that. So I've got this thing, it's called the Airlift. Basically, this is a different part. But this is the main vacuum. We've got a vacuum gauge here. This is the part that you stick down in the reservoir cap. So make sure it's all the way loose. It is. Push it down in there, and then I'll twist this main part here, and that will tighten the seal. That feels snug. This guy is the Venturi. I'll snake the hose back around. The hose is just here in case it spits coolant or something. Then you connect that to this guy. All right, we'll open, so nice and snug here. We'll go ahead and open the valve. So this is all you got to do. We'll connect the shop air here. Should immediately start going. All right, we blew a little bit of water out that time because there was condensation in this tank, but we successfully sucked a vacuum. So we're gonna take the venturi off, grab our water and our intake hose, attach the intake hose, open that valve, bring our water up here, stick this all the way in the bottom, and turn her on. It takes just a little bit more than a gallon, so I'm going to pull this out and grab another one so I don't run out and have to suck a vacuum again. Now I'm going to start watching the tank to see when it starts filling the tank. Oh, there it goes. Might have overfilled it just a little bit. It was fast. All right, so that's all there is to it. Now we're full of coolant again. Of course, remember to close the drain cock at the bottom of the radiator before doing this, otherwise it'll start coming out. Well, you won't be able to hold a vacuum either, so you'll know if you forget. All right, we'll put the radiator cap back on and start her up. One other thing to note, it's important to leave the heat on when you run the car. It does take a little bit longer to heat up that way, but it basically also clears out the heater core. If for whatever reason you're reverse flushing your engine, you definitely should not have the heater core open because you don't want to blast stuff back up in there. But if you're running it normally, it's totally fine to have the heater core open and flush everything in there out as well. All right, after a long second day of working on the car after work, I am now complete other than getting it down off of these ramps. Obviously the front bumper's back on, lights are reconnected, wheel well liners are secured, under tray's back on. All the odds and ends are kind of wrapped up. So hopefully now the only thing left to do is to just add coolant after it cools down and bring it up above this mend line tomorrow morning. So to recap, I did end up flushing this with water twice. That got most of the coolant out. I believe that there is a drain on the engine block itself, but you have to take part of the exhaust off, I believe. I believe it's on the back of the block. I couldn't actually ever see it. I think it's up hidden behind where the exhaust comes out the back. So I didn't actually drain the block. So it's not surprising to me that I didn't get the whole, I think it's 4.1 quarts out each time. When I refilled it, it was a little bit less than a gallon each time. And so that's like 3.8 quarts, less than 3.8 quarts. So after 2 flushes, I think I got most of the coolant out. And so now I have done the exact same thing again as I just showed you, except with coolant. So now there's coolant, antifreeze, whatever you want to call it, in the system. Thanks for tuning in. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I hope to keep making many more, and we'll take her out for a drive and make sure everything's running well tomorrow.